Hi everyone. So today I'm sitting in our Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV rather than the Polestar 2, and I thought I'd make a video that's basically a short overview of what it's like to own a car like this rather than a full electric. Basically, a couple of years ago we thought it would be really nice to try out the plug-in hybrid concept, and we settled on the Mitsubishi as that's basically, that's been one of their best-selling vehicles in the UK, and brings together basically an engine and a battery. So you've got, some would say, the best of both worlds, but in some ways maybe it's the worst of both worlds too. So yeah, if you keep watching, I'll go through some of the key features, some of the good things about the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV, and some of the things that maybe aren't so good. And yeah, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe and also like this video and leave any comments. Let me know what you think down below. Right, let's go for a drive, and I'll start talking about the Mitsubishi. So if you're not familiar with the concept, the plug-in hybrid PHEV is a car that has both a battery and an engine. And the idea behind it is, I guess, to bridge the gap between driving a fossil fuel car and driving a full electric. So that small battery in a plug-in hybrid like this will allow you to do a certain range of driving. And in the case of the Mitsubishi, it's in real world terms, it's about 20 to 25 miles of pure electric driving. If you want to do any more than that, then the engine will kick in. So you can go as far as you like and drive it just like you would any normal car. But the issue with it is that, and this is what I find personally, is you find yourself in a position where once you get used to driving this car, you don't want to drive it on anything but electricity. It drives so well on battery power alone that when the engine does kick in, it feels unnatural and a little bit frustrating. So the particular implementation from Mitsubishi's point of view is to utilize a continuously variable transmission. So when the engine does kick in, you don't really notice it from a driving point of view. You don't feel gears change or anything different, but you do hear a lot of engine noise. And from my point of view, just that frustrating feeling of actually having to use fuel. So these are great cars, there's no doubt about that, but once you get used to it, and if you enjoy the electric concept, it just becomes irritating if you have to then rely on fuel. The nice thing about it though is that if you want to go and do a long journey, drive from here to the north of Scotland and not worry about charging, then you don't have to. You can just use fuel. So my personal way of driving this car has been to charge it every single day at home as much as possible, also to charge it at work if I can, and even charge it on other chargers as well, like free pod point chargers, for example, at Tesco. And that method works very well. I typically would drive this car and utilize electricity most of the time, on especially on short range journeys, because if you're driving no more than 10 to 20 miles, then it's easy to do that on battery alone and plug in at the end of the journey and then charge up again and then go back home. So from my perspective, it has worked very well. So when you're driving the Mitsubishi Outlander, you can see here on the display that on the left-hand side, you have an eco, a charge, and then at the top, you've got the blue section that shows engine power. That blue section is only used if the engine is on. Generally, you're driving, if you've got battery power, in the green zone, and when you're braking, the motors will regenerate electricity and it will show to be in the charging area. Now, one thing that's a little different about the Mitsubishi that not all electric or hybrid cars have are these silver paddles on the steering wheel. It has 5 levels of regenerative braking, from 0, which is coasting, all the way up to number 5. So actually it's 6 really, 0 being coasting, and then 1 to 5 are the actual braking numbers. That will allow you to choose how much automatic regenerative braking is going to happen when you take your foot off the accelerator. So like on the Polestar 2, in my other videos, I've talked about one pedal driving. You've got 2 levels of one pedal driving and off on the Polestar that you can change on the screen. On this, you've got 5 levels and then off that you can change via the paddles. And actually, it may seem like overkill, but I rarely enjoyed using it that way. Typically what I'll do is on the motorway, if I want to coast, I just use the paddles to turn it to 0. And then as you get to your exit, you can turn off and you can use those paddles to slow the car down. And actually, I think that's the most efficient way of driving, because full one pedal mode is actually sometimes too much regeneration, and coasting would be more efficient. So I really like that concept in the Mitsubishi, and it's something that I thoroughly enjoy driving this car. So what's the economy like, and how much energy does it use? Well, the display on this screen is a little unusual. It's got quite a lot of data. It's buried in some of the menus. So if I have a look at the vehicle information menu, I can actually get to the history information. And in that menu, it shows your average electric and fuel usage over time. So if I look at the long range, it's showing an average of about 100 miles per gallon in fuel, and then electrical consumption is showing an average of about 2 miles per kilowatt. So that's not great. This is a big, heavy car, and that's typically what you get in the winter. You'd be lucky to get any better than that. Maybe in the summer, there might have been times where I'd get, say, 3 if you're driving very carefully, maybe with the air conditioning off. But yeah, it's a big, heavy car, so it's not going to be very efficient. So from that point of view, efficiency is not great, but it's still really, really cheap if you can drive around on electricity alone most of the time. Well, how does it compare on fuel? So my personal experience with this is that if you aren't charging the battery and you're just driving around on fuel, you still have the benefits of the regenerative braking, putting energy into the battery. Now, there are ways you can actually set the car to start charging the battery using the engine if you want. There's a save button, which will save your battery power for later in the journey. As you can see in the center console, there's lots of buttons here. And obviously it's all-wheel drive, so you've got that you can control. And the sport button as well will give you, actually it's quite powerful. If you go for the sport option, it'll put all that energy through the motors, and it feels quite nippy to drive. But in terms of economy, I'd say this is like driving a diesel, but with petrol. So the types of economy numbers you sort of see are 40 to 45 miles per gallon without battery power, but that's from a petrol engine car. And it's big, it's heavy. You probably wouldn't see that from most petrol vehicles like this. So even if you aren't charging the car, it's still relatively efficient. This screen that you can see up front will show you the overall vehicle, and at the front you've got the engine compartment, and then here in the middle you've got the blue area that shows the battery. Now when you're driving, this is actually really good at showing you where the energy is coming from, so you don't have to do anything. The car will do it itself, and it will show you if the car is powering the wheels from the battery, and if the engine comes on, that will illuminate, and it will illuminate blue if the engine is creating electricity to power the wheels or the battery, which it will do in sport mode and in some scenarios, or it may go orange if the engine is actually powering the front wheels, as it would do in a traditional car. So it's got a few different ways of approaching its power delivery, and that's not something that the user has to fiddle around with or touch. You don't have to do anything there, you can just leave it. But that's basically how it would determine what it wants to do. So if you want to force it into electric only mode, you can do that using an EV button down here at the bottom, and that will stop the engine kicking in. So even if you floor it and you want as much power as possible, it won't put the engine on. That's a great way to drive if you're doing short journeys and you just want to force it to be in electric mode. So how do you charge the Mitsubishi? Well, it's got 2 different options for plug types. It's got a Type 1 plug, which is the same that you find on like an older 2015 Nissan Leaf, for example, and then the CHAdeMO, which is the DC charging plug, and they sit side by side. So this kind of arrangement perhaps isn't as good as the newer DC type with the CCS system and the Type 2, where they basically sit on top of each other. So it takes up more space on the vehicle. But the limitation on the Mitsubishi is that it's just a 3 kilowatt charger. So you're not going to get any benefit by using a 7 kilowatt charging location. And to be honest, it's hardly any slower really when you charge with a 3-pin power adapter. So yeah, the car comes with both cables basically. So you don't really save much time by charging on a 3 kilowatt. But yeah, it's not too bad. You'll get a full charge in about 3 hours, maybe 4 on a normal 3-pin socket, which will get you a 25 mile range. So in terms of cost versus diesel or petrol, I'd say this car has saved me quite a lot of money. I probably spend a third of the usual fuel bill from a normal vehicle, a previous car, because we are charging it all the time. And if you're able to charge at night during economy 7, or perhaps on something like Octopus Go or Agile, you could get that charging cost down to 5, maybe 7, 8 pence per kilowatt, which if it is 2 to 3, that will get you 2.5, 3 pence per mile. Now when you're running on fuel, you're looking at more like 12, 13 pence per mile. So you can see that electrical consumption number is about a quarter of what you would expect if you're spending money on fuel. And if you can do 2/3 of your driving, 3/4 of your driving with electricity, then those savings stack up incrementally. So it is a cost saving, and in reality I think about 60 to 70 pounds I'd save per month driving this car. So the main things that I really like about the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV are, well, it's a big, solid, well-built car, and it might not have the same sort of build standard that you might expect from, say, a BMW or from VW, but it is functional and everything is practical. Like some of the finishes are quite plasticky, but the door pockets are massive, so you can fit probably at least a bottle of water in each one, maybe 2, at least a bottle in each one at the back. The center armrest folds down with 2 cup holders, and there are 2 further cup holders down here at the front. Massive storage under here. So from a practicality point of view, it's great, especially for families with children. The boot's massive, the seats flip down. In fact, the seats recline, so with child seats, you can get them in a really nice, comfortable position. So it's got loads of practical elements to it. In terms of driving it, the handling's fine. It's nothing special. It's a comfortable car, but it's not sporty by any means. But the efficiency, I think, is excellent. If you need a car that you can travel long distances in if you want to, then you can do it. But if you have a car that you regularly might drive around town or in a city, you could plug this in every single day and do 20 miles of driving, perhaps drop the children off at school, go to work, come back. And if it's just 20 miles a day, you could never use fuel. You could be in a position where you would go, for a couple of months without actually using any fuel. Which incidentally, the car itself will start to use the fuel if you haven't done so. Within a certain period of time, it's clever enough to know that it should start using up the fuel rather than have it sit in the tank for too long. So that I really like. Now, the downsides of a car like this are that the changeover between battery and the engine can sometimes be a little bit irritating. So you can find yourself, it's whiny sometimes, it's quite noisy, the engine, and you find yourself wishing that it was always an electric. That's what happened to me. Like within 6 months, I kept thinking, I wish this was just a pure electric car, not something that would sometimes have the engine on, sometimes not have the engine on. But that's a good thing. These are like gateway cars. You will either love them or you'll hate them, in which case you might just go back to a fuel car. But if you love them, probably what will happen is it'll just increase your desire to drive a pure electric that, okay, obviously we need good range, but a pure electric that has a couple of 100-mile range. And that's what happened to me. Once I tried that concept, and I was absolutely 100% sold. And that's about it. That's the only thing I would say that the negative about this car. Possibly the other one might be the display system here. You can see the screen's quite small, but the layout and the icons, they look, I don't know what this is from. Like, color scheme is really odd. And it certainly is a lot far behind something like the Polestar, or even like most of the BMW navigation systems, not navigation, but display systems. The Android Auto works really well. So once you've got your phone plugged in, that's no big deal. Well, I hope this has been useful. This is just a short review really of the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV and what it is. I just wanted to talk about another car that we own and we have experience with, and give people a little bit of insight into the concept of driving a plug-in hybrid and how that would work, and whether it's useful or not. So yeah, I hope this has been useful for you, and please subscribe down below if you can, and like and share any comments, and I'll see you again on the next video. Thank you.